want to go back now to the Canadian election. Let's bring in Nelson Wiseman. He's Professor Emeritus at the Department of Political Science in the University of Toronto. Professor, thanks so much for joining us. I wanted to ask first, this is a snap election. If it wasn't for COVID, would this be happening at all?
Well, if it wasn't for COVID, no, we wouldn't be. Well, there's a couple of ways to look at it. The Liberals got very good ratings from the public for COVID, and they thought that's going to carry them through in the election. But there was hubris there, because although the attitudes of the public were favorable to what the Liberals had done with respect to COVID, they resented the fact that the election was being called in the midst of this fourth wave of the pandemic here in Canada. And the Liberals didn't anticipate that. Also, the Conservatives, the new Conservative leader who had won the party leadership last year by running from the right in his party, and moved toward the center during this campaign, which is only 5 weeks long. And this confounded the Liberals and threw it into a very close race. There was hubris on the side of the Liberals. They simply thought they were going to trot into power because the polls showed that they were 10 percentage points ahead. But the minute the election was called, people said, why are we having an election? Everything you proposed as government got through the parliament. You weren't defeated. So there's that resentment. But it looks like the Liberals will still win, but in a narrow minority, perhaps smaller than the one they won 2 years ago.
Which parts of Canada are hurting the most right now, and how is that affecting Trudeau? I mean, he's never really had much support in the prairies and in the oil-rich middle parts of the country.
That's true. That's true. If we're thinking economically, Atlantic Canada has always been a laggard. The growth in Canada economically has been concentrated in Ontario, the industrial heartland, and in the far west, which is Alberta and British Columbia. And both of those are very heavily dependent on energy and other resources such as forestry. Saskatchewan is also a player. That's in the Midwest. It borders Alberta on the east. And now that we're talking about economy, one of the issues that's been coming up, Canada spent more than any other G7 country as a percentage of its GDP to help people who were unemployed, to help small businesses that closed, to help our airlines, which were, devastated, as airlines were around the world. So there hasn't been much talk about the deficit and the debt. That's generally good grounds for the Conservatives, and they're talking about balancing the budget within a decade. The Liberals aren't even talking about balancing the budget, and a threat to Canada's budget is if interest rates go up. Right now they're at 4%, which is 2% above the target of the Bank of Canada.
It's interesting you mentioned that Aaron O'Toole ran from the right of his Conservative Party, but went towards the center, further center in this campaign. I'm thinking about the labels that we have in Canada versus the labels that we have here in the U.S. Many Conservatives in Canada would fit quite nicely into the American Democratic Party. I mean, Canada traditionally is much more liberal than the U.S. Are we seeing a shift to the political right, though, in Canada?
Well, you're making an excellent point. Conservatives here are quite different from the U.S. If we look, for example, comparing the U.S. and Canada in terms of the constituency that a Donald Trump had, in Canada, Donald Trump would have gotten 10–15% of the vote. And indeed, in this election, we have a fringe party, which got less than 2% of the vote last time running from the right. And this time, it looks like it's going to get between 5 and 6%. Conservatives in Canada support universal health care. We don't have that in the United States. They support gun control. We don't have that in the United States. So you're right. A lot of conservatives here were cheering for Democrats and Biden in the last American election. But we have a political culture that's more liberal and is more like Europe. Canada is really in the mid-Atlantic there, heavily influenced by the United States because of the economic impact of the U.S. and the cultural impact, because we get American media. At the same time, we're influenced by Europe because that's Canada's heritage. And Canada never revolted against Europe the way the United States did in their revolution.